How many years have I worked using these for and I still can't work them? Anyway. And if Helen was the bearer of good news, I'm a journalist, I'm the bearer of bad news. Um, this picture here is the BBC newsroom, one of my former employers. Bit about me, I trained to be a doctor. I worked on the BMJ for quite a long time as investigations editor. Some of my co-conspirators are sitting around this room. Undercover stories on device regulation or lack of, marketing of diabetes drugs, Tamiflu, buried data on anticoagulants. Then I worked on a long-form documentary programme called Panorama, where we looked at evidence around claims of fertility add-on treatments. And then I had the joy of being Newsnight's health editor during the pandemic, which was hell. Newsnight, for people who don't know, is the BBC's main flagship news and current affairs show, and it's pretty hardcore. And then I was science editor of ITV News. Now, ITV News is probably the broadcast equivalent of the Daily Mail. So the audience is big, 4 million. It has a lunchtime news bulletin, an evening news bulletin, news at 10 bulletin, digital content and online content, and I was responsible for the science of it all. So you can imagine breaking stories every single day in health and science, what kind of pressure you are under. You've got 2 minutes to do a story, add nuance, ask the right questions, get the right pictures. I might be called up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to have a package together for the 6 o'clock news. So that's some context of being a journalist on the mainstream media. So when we talk about journalism, we need to bear all this in mind. Now I'm going to throw this open to you. What makes a story? I'm there, I'm going to my programme. And the other thing is, the likes of ITV News or Newsnight, I'm not necessarily deciding the content. They might go, there's a brilliant story here, we want it on the news. I might go, it's a load of shit. They will say, tough, you're doing it. So that's another context. So what makes it onto the news? What are the things that will get it on? Throw it open to you. I have got another slide, but yep, scandal. We all like a scandal. Scandals are hard to do though. They do require some investigation. And if you've got to fill news programmes, fill content, fill pages, you often don't have much time to do the kind of scandals well. So that's an opportunity for you guys. Oh yeah, we like a bit of fear. Yeah, we do. We like a bit of fear. Yeah. Miracle cures. And actually, since the pandemic, people want good news. You can bring bad news, and particularly health and science is one area. We've given quite a lot of bad news recently. It's one area where you can deliver good news. And that is a massive pressure. As a journalist, they're like, we want some good news stories. And I'm like, I'm not the best person for that. I normally bring doom and investigation. So, it's new trial results, drug approvals, new screening tests, pretty obvious. This is a big issue for you guys. You're operating against a very, very well-oiled PR machine. Press release pops up. Program editor, we want you to do this. And I'll give you an example during the pandemic. Pfizer phase 3 trial for their mRNA vaccine. Comes out as a press release. No publication of the trial. The program editor of Newsnight phones me and said, Deb, we want you to cover this tonight on tonight's programme. I can't, I haven't seen the trial. Tough shit, you're on, you're doing it, you're reporting it. So what do you do? You're in my position. I'm employed by the BBC. I am told I have to report on a press release. I have a blanket rule. I don't do that. This instance, everybody's talking about it. You've got to go on air and talk about it. What do you do? So I made a calculated decision, and I interviewed someone who's a pharmacoepidemiologist at the London School called Stephen Evans, who I knew from my BMJ days. And I was just really upfront. I said, this is what I've only seen a press release. This is what the press release tells me. This is what it doesn't tell me. It didn't tell me anything about non-serious infection. It didn't tell me anything about transmission. It didn't tell me anything about the uncertainty. So I reported that. And it was really high risk when all the other pages on the news were like, this is going to reduce your chance of hospitalisation by 95%. That was really going against the grain. Those things happen, and I think it takes, and this is where you guys come in. I had the confidence to do that because I had the backing of somebody I knew and trusted who was Stephen Evans at the London School. This is where you guys come in. If you want to influence news, you have to speak to journalists. You have to make yourself available. You have to give them the confidence to be nuanced and add context, because I can tell you the pressure from the top is coming down the other way. And I'm confident enough to push back, because I've worked on a medical journal, because I've got a medical degree, because I work with Carl at the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine. I'm confident enough to do that, but I'm a rarity in journalism. And the pandemic has caused particular issues. They want breakthroughs. You know, I hate to use the term, but they want breakthroughs. And one of the things, TV, you'll see it on this list here, exclusive access. In telly, if you've got no picture, if there's nothing to see, you haven't got a story. And so it's great if you can go and get access. I did a few for ITV News, but I was really cautious in the stories I did. So I went and filmed, it was an NIHR-funded trial of an RCT of a device, blinded RCT of a device, which was really rare, and it was blinded and it was randomised, and I thought this is actually quite a good example of quite good science. And so I was happy to do it on that particular instance. It was for an obesity intervention that was being run by Imperial College and UCL. So I was okay with that. And the surgeon involved and the interventional radiologists were really nuanced and really cautious. But it was a way of explaining what randomisation was. It was a way of explaining blinding. It was a way of explaining what, you know, an RCT was. So that's another thing. That we've got a bit of a joke, and obviously, I hope this isn't being recorded, and I do apologise to Fergus Walsh, who was the medical editor of the BBC. There's a bit of a joke kind of amongst health journalists that he's done so many breakthrough treatments, so many kind of trials. We all joke, wonder how many of those breakthrough treatments have actually made it onto routine NHS care. Probably not very many. The other thing is patient groups. Patient groups, charities, you know, they're always calling for something, calling for screening, calling for an access to a drug. Now, as a journalist, I will ask, and not many do, where are their conflicts of interest? Where are their agenda? Who's funding them? And again, that is something you can potentially help with. Public service broadcasting. During the pandemic, this was particularly an issue. Your job as a broadcaster is as much about public service. So if the government makes an announcement, particularly during something like a pandemic, or there's a new screening programme rolled out, you have to report it. Now the question is then, is that the time to critically appraise something? And that was a real issue during the BBC during the pandemic. I worked on a news programme that's quite kind of feisty, so I could question stuff. But if you're on the 10 o'clock news, at what point can you question interventions, or what point do you have to take the government's word or scientists' word for stuff? And that's a real tension in particularly in mainstream broadcast journalism. Other stuff, celebrity endorsement. I saw Stephen Fry, who is is an actor. You may or may not have heard of him in the UK. He was advocating going for prostate screening the other day in all the papers, funded by prostate screening charity. I wonder where they get their funding from. I haven't actually looked, but again, and the mainstream media, broadcast media, the BBC, ITV, is not immune from social media influences. They want to break into social media. They're terrified about their dwindling audiences, as we saw before in the younger generations. So, you know, they will get in front of camera as well. So if someone famous calls for something, they'll get in front of camera. And there's a real trend in the media at the moment talking about me and my illness. So we've seen it a lot in the UK about the menopause or about autism, all these other conditions that there may be issues to do with overdiagnosis. Now, if I'm writing something, that can provide an opportunity for you. You can provide commentary, critique about a film that might have gone out that looked at menopause. I think the BMJ have used that as a peg to look at menopause. So there are opportunities, even though there are problems here, there are opportunities for you to kind of come on and comment, offer op-eds to newspapers, not just journals, but newspapers. And the other big one are other media outlets reporting it. So the number of times I've sat at ITV, the BBC have got that on air, and I'm like, yeah, but it's bullshit. They're like, but the BBC are reporting it, so people will be talking about it, so you have to report it. So, and then my job is then to find a fresh angle, and that can provide a bit of an opportunity to kind of go, well, you might have seen this, but actually this is really what's going on. The patient groups issue can be really challenging. Again, last year there was a lot of lobby for a drug called Evusheld, which was a monoclonal antibody for use in COVID, and it was trialled in, the first wave, I think, so the Wuhan variant in a total immune-naive population, non-vaccinated, hadn't been exposed to COVID, and patient groups wanted the access to this drug. And I think I was the only journalist to push back on them. I got reign of terror afterwards, from the patient group for kind of pushing back and questioning their claims. Because one of the things it's really hard to do, if you've got a vulnerable person sitting in front of you, as a journalist, they're not well, they're scared. How do you push back and challenge? And that's really tricky. So you have to be very, very careful, and it can go very wrong, which we will see. So that's in a nutshell. There are other things. Scandal is where I think you guys can happily sit. So I've gone the wrong way. I'm not a PowerPoint expert. Okay, so this is for you guys. You want to get overdiagnosis into the media. Think about what your headline is. What is it you are trying to say? Follow the money. Who's cashing in? Pre-diabetes, things like that. Have a think about what your story is. Who's making money out of you being sick? Who's selling the sickness? Overdiagnosis is a concept. If I said to her, oh, this might lead to overdiagnosis, a program editor would just look at me and go, what? I mean, the kind of things I've said is like, oh, if it saves one life, surely it's worth it. That's a very hard concept for people to overcome. Surely picking up something early is a really good thing. Why wouldn't you want to pick up something early? And it's complicated. The problem, I think, sometimes with overdiagnosis is you've got complexity and uncertainty on your side, where the other side have certainty and a big shiny breakthrough new thing that's going to get everybody sick, everybody better, everybody sick probably is true. So there is a real tension. If for like an ADHD diagnosis, well, if it helps them understand stuff, surely that's okay. That's a good thing. If it just helps them make sense of things, even if even if you're looking at kind of disease creation expansion, explaining these things are really difficult. That's why you have to be a little bit clever in your stories. And there are stories to tell, and you need to use plain language. So rather than talking about overdiagnosis, what are we saying? Who's cashing in? Follow the money. AF screening, atrial fibrillation screening. There was a massive demand for that. Well, who's actually calling for it? It turns out it's the manufacturers of anticoagulants and those, offering apps to screen for AF. Help journalists. If you've got an article in the journal, maybe hold a few things back that journalists can get their teeth stuck into and follow the money and give them a story. It might be, pre-diabetes. Well, where are the calls coming from? Where are the guidelines? Who's funding the guidelines? So do a little bit of that. Another one, you've got questionable claims. So we've heard quite a bit about direct-to-consumer testing. Do a story on that. That's a great story, but kind of make sure that you don't cherry pick. So I'll give an example. Carl and I did a story about claims from fertility clinics, and we were really rigorous in how we did it. We had a pre-specified protocol. We looked at the claims from all sorts of fertility clinics within a certain period of time, scraped them, said what we were doing, and then looked at the evidence for all the claims. Were they really going to help you have a baby? So, but you can do that in so many areas of testing. The other story is buyer beware. What are you spending your money on that you really shouldn't be spending your money on? And again, that's another way to introduce various concepts around overdiagnosis. And the other one with the celebrities, get back at celebrity. As much as we like a celebrity being famous, we also like to see them fall. So, that's an opportunity as well. Stephen Fry, you're talking nonsense. This is why. So another, promoting false hope. And work with journalists and write op-eds, get yourselves out there. I know that's easy for me to say as a journalist, and it can be a bit intimidating. But there are so many different outlets now. You don't have to go to all the formal places. There are blogs, there's social media in all its different forms. I don't even know where to start. So this is one we did earlier that was kind of, and again, it was with Carl. Sorry, Carl, I'm mentioning you a lot. This was about dehydration, sports drinks. And I never knew sports drinks were so controversial till we published this. I was persona non grata with sports scientists, I can put it that way. I mean, who'd have thought sports drinks can transform everything? But what it was, sports drinks, they created this idea of dehydration first, and they had guidelines to treat it. And by doing that, they actually created a disease, exercise-induced hyponatremia. People were drinking too much. And there's a paper in the New England Journal from the Boston Marathon where people were falling down because they drunk too much and they had cerebral edema. So what we did here is we looked at the claims made by sports drink companies, and this was just in the run-up to the London Olympics. We did it with BBC Panorama. We scraped the websites, looked at the claims and looked at the evidence, and then followed the money, looked at the guidelines, who was funding the IOC, FIFA, UEFA. Oh, look, it was the sports drinks companies. But what we had a really good example here of disease mongering leading to direct harm. And what was good about that story is everybody's heard of Gatorade, Powerade, and in the UK, Lucozade. And GSK gave us their data, gave us all their clinical trials. There wasn't a single clinical trial there. They were all kind of crappy studies, but they gave us their data. And GSK were actually going into schools at the time, telling kids, they soon stopped this when we reported it, they were telling kids that they should be drinking sports drinks because water was bad and might effectively melt their brain. So literally I was looking at, oh, and actually GSK sold Lucozade quite shortly after that investigation. It was a bit embarrassing for them. So, right, I'm going the wrong way again. And this could have been a brilliant story. It was ADHD and it was BBC Panorama. You can see they're cashing in on the social media. Look, they've got a kind of someone that's really trendy and looks like he should be reporting for Vice. But they kind of went horribly wrong. They did a sting on ADHD clinics. They could have talked about overdiagnosis. But he made it about himself. He talked about me and my sting. Always take patients with you. When you do this stuff, think about the people whose lives you're trying to transform. This ended up being the most ever complained about Panorama, which is no mean feat given I've done quite a few. So this is the most complained about Panorama, and patients were really upset because they found it stigmatizing. So you've got to take, if you do this stuff, you've got to take people with you. And it was such a shame. They had a really good opportunity to do something really good around this. So don't go with hipsters is another bit of advice. Right, ones to watch. Now, one of the things I say to you, you guys have to think like the marketing men. Women, men, women. Think of the Don Drapers in Mad Men. You've got to think like them because they're thinking about it. What are your sell? What are you trying to sell? What's your story? What's your headline? What's your catch? And Horizon Scan. Now here we have this well-known expert, former Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, talking about these Alzheimer's drugs. And we've seen some of the headlines. And David Cameron wants these to be a statin for the brain. This was BBC, totally uncontested. He appeared on the Today programme. This appeared on the website. Today programme's the flagship breakfast news programme. This was so one-sided reporting. And he was quoted in full. So basically, he's advocating these very expensive, risky, not especially effective Alzheimer's treatments should be used like statins. Then we have patient groups. And obviously, the great thing for journalists with patient groups is they provide you patients, case studies. Everyone needs a case study. Numbers just don't work quite as well. Anecdote case studies, far more powerful. And that's what social media kind of rely on as well. Oh God, going the wrong way again. Alzheimer's disease. I put that declaration of interest up there, by the way. None of the news stories had declared it, but I kind of did a quick look on Eli Lilly's website and found, oh look, they got some money from Eli Lilly. But they're pushing for earlier and earlier diagnosis, and they're putting pressure on the NHS. The NHS, and then obviously the NHS rolls out opportunity costs, all that kind of thing. They're not equipped to do that at this scale. So you've got the charities launching, and it's so beautifully coordinated. I mean, we'll have to do a timeline of when things appeared. So beautifully coordinated. And then Alzheimer's Research UK, we've already got calls for screening over 50s. So this, to me, for you guys, is a story in the making. Oh, look, and I've just noticed that the Hilary Evans, Alzheimer's Research UK, heavily funded by Eli Lilly, is also chair of the government's mission for dementia. Now, there's a story in itself. So you pull together, I mean, it didn't take me long to kind of pull those bits together, but there you've got a story, and you're kind of highlighting how a mixture of charity and drug companies are potentially kind of, you know, disease mongering, screening, all the harms of that, and that's there for the taking. Steve, fancy it? That story? Yeah, the Alzheimer's drug story. Well, anyway, we might cover that story. I might think of a home for that. So in a nutshell, I mean, there's lots out there that you can go at, and I think the thing is make yourselves available. People like me, need people like you. And by and large, journalists don't want to do a bad job on the whole, although at the moment there is massive pressure. And that's why we need you guys to step forward and help us out and help us interpret this kind of stuff. So I will be here to answer your questions at the end. Thank you.